this industry is constantly, and this industry being film music is constantly an ebb and flow. Every famous composer, or most of them at least, it's not W-2 income. This is not a job per se,
Right.
in this the way that most people consider what a job is. It's 1099 income. You're being hired. You're a work for hire. It's a contract. So recently I was just laid off by one of the composers that I work with, through no fault of his. Everything is wonderful, and he is and will always be one of the kind of cornerstone mentors of mine moving forward into my career. Jonique Bontemps, he just did. I say just, it was almost 2 years ago now, but Transformers, the
Oh,
Transformers
nice.
Rise of the Beasts, wonderful score. But the industry is in a little bit of a slump right now. We had all the strikes last year. Well, that's going to affect post production about a year later. So here we are. The composers are usually the last ones to come onto the process anyway. So things are a little bit slow for him. So he had to lay me off, and I was working as an assistant, and for him that is anything from tech to doing additional music and that kind of thing. So I never felt less than or anything. If anything, I always felt like a partner with him. He's wonderful. But currently, I feel like, in a weird way, this is the first time where I'm making the decision to step out and kind of do my own thing as a composer. Maybe from the first decision to do that, going to grad school, well, is that really, you're still in a nest, you're still
Right.
safe, you are making a career and a name for yourself, you're starting. But being a student is very different than being a freelancer, is very different than being a W-2 employee. So graduating grad school and moving to LA was certainly another one of those. But again, I moved to LA as a grad student at USC. So does that really count? Graduating USC and then realizing it was possible. I mean, I guess I knew it was possible, relatively speaking. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone into like $150,000 in debt, student loan debt, to do it. But, so the story goes. I think maybe the first time, I graduated from USC, and it was 2020, which was, kind of the height of the Black Lives Matter and COVID simultaneously. And, the phone rang, and it was Russell Emanuel over at Bleeding Fingers, which is Hans Zimmer's, composer collective
Mm.
that he, works with, or they do work for him. And they wanted me to come on board. They realized they kind of needed to diversify a bit, for better or worse. And I think that was maybe one of the first times where I was like, oh wow, okay, this is a job. This is an industry. I remember when I was in school and I was like, okay, what might I want to do with this whole composing thing? This was at Moorhead, and I looked up starting salary of a film composer, and I was like, okay, well, this doesn't seem terrible. I'll do this. There's money, at least some. I was so wrong, but there's
Yeah.
enough. But yeah, and then graduating, going from 10 years later, graduating and working almost 10 years later, but graduating and then working at Remote Control on Hans's campus with my own room, my own assistant. It was great, and getting to collaborate with still some of the dearest friends and some of the most wonderful young composers over at that place. I mean, it was an invaluable experience, but one, again, that I still almost would not consider making a career or making that decision. A great example of everything that I was just talking about. Bleeding Fingers is W-2 income, which is great. It's a wonderful thing to not have to worry about where your next paycheck is. But that also means that it's not really your decision on the direction that your career goes, or the projects that you're working on, or even in some cases what your day-to-day looks like. And that's not really something that I wanted. And I think, to maybe more directly answer your question, it has only really been in the past year that I have truly kind of looked at myself and where I've come from, and also where I would like to be moving forward, that I started making these kind of decisions where it's like, you know what? No, this is something that I want to take seriously on my own.
Yeah.
I've seen how other people do it. I've seen how mentors have done it. I've seen how Hans runs his business and runs his camp of composers. I've seen how those composers and dear friends of mine run their rooms and their assistants. And I think I just want to do things a little bit differently. And it takes a little bit of courage to make a decision like that. And it's something, again, coming back to JB, Janique, he was very encouraging. When I left Bleeding Fingers, I started doing work for him, have or was for the past year. He was very encouraging the entire time I was there. He was like, look, see this as a stepping stone. You're just working with me to get somewhere else. You're going to see how I do things, and I want you to go off and be your own composer. So treat your room like your room, treat your work like your work, and go kind of take on the world. And I cannot thank him enough for that. But again, the decision is still mine to make on when I make that call. So it's a very roundabout way to answer the question, but I think really the question is maybe the past 3 to 4 months that I have made the decision to really take this career, quote unquote, seriously as my own composer and see what that even means. What does that mean? Who is Austin Hammonds? Who is this guy? Let alone, funny enough, breaking the fourth wall here, let alone who is this guy that your listeners are listening to? But for me intrinsically, who is this guy that I keep saying I want to become, but haven't quite pulled the trigger on yet? And I'm excited and I am curious about where this goes over the next year or so. I mean, hoping, knock on wood, hoping that I don't just fail and flop. But I can't really accept that as a possibility, because if I do, it'll happen.
I think it's interesting and inspiring what you're describing, because I think for a lot of people, and this isn't a criticism. It's just, people live their lives the way they live it and proceed through their
Right.
lives the way that they do. I think a lot of people don't have the level of self-reflection that you're talking about. And so, like you start school doing the thing, and then you just stay on the track. And if it serves you, maybe you don't think too much about it and you
Yeah.
just keep going.
Values like that, for me, I have to give a credit to my mom and family. Everybody brings up their family as a thank you and that kind of thing. But, I was so fortunate to have a mom who raised me to just follow whatever it is I loved. Doesn't matter what it is, just follow it.
Yeah.
And I think that does it makes you think. It makes you almost have to think and self-reflect from a young age to figure out what it is you love. What does love even mean when it comes to picking a career or choosing to follow something blindly into this this void of time that is just kind of laid out in front of us. I consider myself very fortunate for that, and I think it's hard sometimes too, because there certainly is something on the other side, something to be said of being too self-reflective, which I have gone very far off the deep end in terms of imposter syndrome and being so reflective that maybe you're not anything when you're comparing yourself to these giants. And I mean, the first time I moved to LA, I almost hated it, which is kind of like weird to say, but I moved here and knowing that somewhere at the time I didn't know where, and I certainly didn't know that I would end up there, but within a 10-mile radius of me when I moved to LA was Hans, and he was working. So here is this new kid on the block who wants to become a composer, and Hans and John Williams and John Powell and James Newton Howard, all these composers that I grew up, aspiring to be like, are all just around you. I think I have been forced to self-reflect, painfully so, but thankfully, when you're surrounded constantly by greatness, including being surrounded by great parents. So I'm very, very fortunate.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline. a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.